You're listening to the Bible Said What podcast, hosted by Elizabeth Pitts. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Bible Said What podcast. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm your host for today. If you'd like to get to know a little bit more about me, a little bit more about the podcast, be sure you go check out our social media at Bible Said What with underscores between the words. Well, today I am super excited to get into our topic. I have an amazing guest with me. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that kind introduction. My name is Susannah, and I am a Christian content creator on Instagram and TikTok. You can find me at Her Faithful Life on there. And then I also run my own Christian podcast, the Lay It Down podcast. You can also find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. But yeah, I'm a Christian content creator. And then outside of that, I work full-time in healthcare. So
Crazy. I mean, I think it's just incredible what you do. I've told you that both on your page and then just in life. Your heart is just so special, so kind.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm really glad that you're on the podcast today, especially to talk about the topic that we're discussing, because I feel like it's something that doesn't go talked about a lot.
Definitely.
But it should be. So the topic we're talking about today is why the wicked prosper, and specifically how we react and what we're supposed to do when we see people prospering in ways of the world, ways that are not of the Lord. And I got this idea because I was reading in Jeremiah. I read Jeremiah over Christmas, and I was in chapter 12, and basically Jeremiah is lamenting to the Lord, like, why are these wicked people prospering? Why are they're not living according to your will, and yet we see them thriving. And I just thought about in my own life, or just in in your general walk with Christ, it is so easy to look at people who are not following the ways of the word and yet still seem like they are just doing great, just doing awesome.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yes. And it can be weird. It can be hard as a Christian, thinking like, oh, I'm not supposed to want these things, but yet it seems so promising. And so that's how we're going to get into our topic today is, first of all, why do we envy people who thrive on things of the world?
Yeah, like I think that people are just prone to that emotion in general, the emotion of envy. And my husband and I were actually just talking about this last night. Not in regard to this podcast or anything, but just because like he's really trying, he's in photography, but his full-time career is real estate. And he was comparing himself in, like, he was trying to do social media as well. And, I am quite successful, I guess I could say, in social media.
Yeah, you've done well.
Yeah. And like, it's been a short period of time, like it hasn't even been a year yet. And so when he sees me, I think he can kind of become envious of like the success, and not saying I'm wicked because I'm following the Lord, but like the envy in general is there. And like even comparing ourselves to friends, or like I was talking to someone else that does content creation, and she's not seeing the results she wants, and she said that she's finding herself becoming envious of others who are succeeding. So I think in general, our hearts are prone to that emotion. But even more so when we see people who aren't following God prospering, who seem to have everything just given to them on a silver platter, whereas we're struggling. But that being said, I do think the important thing to remember here is the biblical truth that Christians are going to suffer in this life.
Right.
And, even though we do suffer, God is with us in the suffering. And our reward is better than anything that those people who are prospering and living in sin will ever get, because we know what awaits them and then what awaits us. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, there's those two components of, first of all, we're naturally inclined to envy and to be jealous because we're broken people. And then we have the other aspect of, well, we're following God faithfully, and yet we're seeing people who aren't thriving. And so those together is just a fatal combination.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And one thing that I want to add to that is the difference between jealousy and envy. So I always was, I guess you could say, taught the jealousy and envy are a little bit different. Jealousy is wanting what someone else has, but envy is not only wanting what someone else has, but having it for yourself and taking it from them. And so whenever we're thinking about this topic of envy versus jealousy, and envying those who are thriving in the world, there's this other deeper component of why do we want to take the things of the world for ourselves? And so that's my contribution to that question is, well, first of all, if we're living as Christ followers, what's the root? What's the root of why we truly want these things of the world? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, like I think because we are sinful beings, naturally we are inclined to want sinful things.
Yeah.
It's like the battle of spiritual warfare. Like we want what is good for us, but we are naturally gravitated to the things that are bad.
Yes.
And yeah. So
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a verse in Romans that talks about that. I'm going to try to find it. But yes, in Romans, Paul was talking about how he's constantly torn between the spirit of his flesh and the spirit of the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll find it. It's important. I'll post it.
No worries.
I'll post
I know
it on the
exactly.
story.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's I guess that's kind of my contribution to that. Like we do and especially with how much all these bad things are promoted in like entertainment and influencers and celebrities, people we tend to want to look up to are typically not following God. And so when all these things are being shoved at us, like you should want this, and then we read the Bible and it says, you actually shouldn't want that.
Right.
It can kind of be confusing to tell your heart to want something else when it's, like I said, naturally inclined to want the other things that aren't good for us, but seem good for us in the moment.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
If sin didn't look attractive, like it wouldn't be an issue for us. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like if it wasn't glorified in the world, then we wouldn't have a problem. We wouldn't have that division between our spirit and our flesh. But me and my roommates were talking about the Garden of Eden the other day, and how we tend to be like, oh, I wouldn't fall for that. Like I wouldn't fall for Satan's lies for taking the fruit. And one of my roommates was like, well, I mean, if you think about it, Satan probably wasn't some like terrifying looking snake. You know what I mean? He was probably very charismatic and maybe very brightly colored, seemed very, he wanted the best for Eve. And that is the exact mask that he puts on sin and that he puts on the things of the world. My saying is like, Satan is not creative. He keeps the exact same lies, the same temptations, just puts them in a different box, wraps them up in a different way. And so that's what he does with all sin and all brokenness, is he makes it look so promising and so good that we get so close to it. And as soon as we touch it, he's like, oh man, you messed up. Sorry, God's not going to love you anymore. You got to come with me. And that's how he gets us. But moving on into our next question is, you touched on this a little bit, but what does the Bible promise about those who live according to the Spirit? So those who, I guess you could say Christians, who do live according to God's Word.
Yeah, so Christians who do live according to God's Word, like we have that reward of eternal life in heaven with Jesus, with God, because of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, because of our faith in him. But whereas the wicked, or we'll just say that people who don't follow Christ,
Right.
they won't make it. They won't have that. They won't have that eternity with God because they're separated from him. They aren't. Me and my friend Brock, we just did a podcast episode about this, but it was like basically we talked about the process of sanctification, and like it means to be set apart for God's purpose, or to be like made holy. And so like during our walk with Christ, we are being sanctified, but like being prepared to walk in, with God in eternity, but they aren't. They're living for the here and the now. They're not looking forward into what comes after this. Or if they do, they think there's nothing. Yeah.
Which is really, that breaks my heart. I feel like that should break all of our hearts. And Psalm 37 talks about that in verses 1 through 7. It says, for they will soon fade like grass. They will wither like the green herb. And I totally skipped a verse. I'm going to back up. Verse 1 says, "Fret not yourself because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass, and they will wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light, as your justice as the noonday. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices." And so that's exactly what you were saying, is David was writing the psalm to say, don't worry about them. The Lord is just and merciful in his own way, and he is going to righteously judge them. But for us, we're supposed to delight ourselves in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I think that phrase, the desires of your heart, some people can get kind of confused with that. The way that I read that is not, oh, I'm going to do the Lord's will and he's going to give me all these worldly things that I'm going to find joy in.
Yeah.
What I equate that to is when you are delighting yourself in the Lord and God's will and what he wants, your will and God's will align. And your heart posture completely changes and your mindset completely changes. And so it moves your focus away from wanting things of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Your heart becomes more, like you said, aligned with God's, and then therefore the desires of your heart are the desires of the Lord.
Yes.
Like, you're going to want exactly what he wants. So like you said, a lot of people get that mixed up and is like, well, I'm committing myself to God. I'm doing all of these things and I'm working for the Lord, which, you know, good works is not the way to get to heaven. Let's just put that out there.
Of course. But it is the fruit. It is the fruit of a faithful life.
Is.
Right. Yeah.
It is. But the desires of your heart naturally are not great. So why would the Lord give you everything that he says isn't good unless your heart is aligned with his?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times the Lord, we can seem like we're focusing on things that are good and things that are going to be used for the Lord's benefit, but he may just be wanting to refocus us a little bit. I think it's really interesting that we're doing this episode this week because I had a week where two things that I had worked really hard for ended up falling through. And I didn't end up seeing the results of my hard work that I wanted. And immediately I started thinking down on myself, thinking, oh Lord, like I feel like I would have really done good work for you in this position, or this would have been so beneficial. I could have used this as a form of ministry. But at the same time, after I spent time with the Lord, that's the key. Before I was spending time with myself, it's just in my own brain. And then after I really just sat with the Lord and listened for a second, I felt a big peace that, maybe the Lord wants me to spend my time doing something else that he has equipped me for that I don't even know is going to happen yet. And so I think it's really interesting that we're talking about this topic after I've had the week that I've had, because it is so easy to fall into focusing on our own desires and not the desires of the Lord. And it can be distracting because we could want things that seem good, but they just may not be the best.
Yeah. And something that I've been, throughout this whole content creation journey that I've been on, and even just with talking with others, there's this concept of doing things with selfish ambition, or gospel ambition. And so
I think we talked about this in December a little bit.
I think so.
Yeah, continue. So sorry to interrupt. Continue.
No, that's okay. But yeah, so something that I've had to constantly check myself with is, am I doing this to glorify God? Which is why I started this whole content creation, posting about God. Yeah. Which one would think is the reason. Or am I doing this to get fame for myself, or to make money, or to get brand deals, or, or to get, attention? Because that's something that I've lacked in my childhood, was attention. Yeah. So it's something that you constantly have to check your heart for. And being in this industry, which you've probably had this yourself, where you get focused on the numbers, or you've worked really hard on a piece of content and it doesn't do as well as you think it might compared to other people that are in the same sort of sphere as you. Yes. So Yeah.
Yes, it's really hard. And social media is really tricky too because we get caught up in the likes. Like it feels so good in our
Yeah.
hearts whenever a video blows up or whenever like a podcast episode does really well. And it's so easy to be like, "Oh, I did such an amazing job." Like, "Oh, I did that just right." But at the end of the day, like you said, we both started this journey for the Lord. And yeah, the enemy is like, you know what? Let's misconstrue that. Let's sprinkle in some pride. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
we need to keep that away.
Yeah. And that's something that I've tried to like, you know, I used to put like tons of hashtags to try to reach all the
Yes.
pages.
Yes.
And something I think yeah, we did talk about this.
We talked about this a little bit. Yeah.
So I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna put any and see if I still
To see.
Yeah, just let God do it. And so that's what I've been doing, and God's been blessing it.
Yeah.
And it's just been a great journey of like really just trusting in the Lord and not really putting it in my own hands, but allowing Him to work.
Right.
And I know that sounds silly because it's social media, but like it is
But it's true.
a part where I had to surrender. Like I don't want to be focused on the numbers. I don't want to be focused on the followers or whatever. And, you know, granted, like I do have quite a bit.
I was going to say, you just hit a pretty big milestone, didn't you?
I did. 100,000 is quite a lot. But something I always want to point out and like something I always want to say is that they're not following me.
Right.
Because like something I always want to make sure that I feel like my voice is weird.
You're good. I have my tea, so I understand.
I'm like, is my voice weird? But something I always want to like make sure is that I'm pointing people to God and not myself.
Yeah.
So like when I first started, I was doing, you know, get ready with me videos or like
Right.
skincare routine or like things like that, outfit of the days or church transitions or whatever.
Right.
And when I started my platform, like I said, it was for God. And then I had to ask myself the question, like, where is God in those pieces of content? Like, where is He being glorified?
Yeah.
He wasn't. So
Right.
then I sat down and I was like, you know what, this verse really spoke to me. I'm going to share that. And then that's kind
Yeah.
of where I was like, this is where God is calling me to glorify Him in. Yeah. Sometimes you have to discern what area, like sometimes God's calling you to a specific area and sometimes it takes time to realize that.
Right. And sometimes you have some closed doors to get you to that area.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The Lord over Christmas break convicted me about the exact same thing. Because it's so easy. It's just so easy to fall into that. But I love what you post. You are so wise and just, oh my goodness, your spirit is just very encouraging for me.
I'm sure my husband would disagree. He sees a whole different side of
That is,
me.
as he should. I mean, as he should.
I'm like sassy and like can be quite temperamental. Yeah.
Nice. Pull out that JL side. You know, bring her out. We got
Yeah.
JL, we got Ruth. We
Yeah,
can be both.
calm on the screen, encouraging, quiet soul.
Uh-huh.
Totally opposite
Yeah.
in real life.
No, I'm crazy too. My roommates, see, I live with two introverts and I'm an extrovert. And so I'm the one who's like, okay, guys, I'm going to film a piece of content. And then I'm like sprinting throughout the whole apartment. They're like, what's happening? It's funny. But yes, kind of going off of this conversation, like you were saying, discernment is a really big thing when we're thinking about glorifying God and not glorifying ourselves or the ways of the world. We have to constantly be in just this position of humble sacrifice, offering ourselves as vessels, and not glorifying the vessel itself, but what is in the vessel, what the contents are.
Yes.
And that reminds me of a verse that I was reading in Hosea a while back that really caught my attention. But at the beginning of Hosea, I love the prophets because you just see such powerful language from the Lord. But there's the imagery of a bride and a groom reflecting Christ in the church. But basically, in this imagery, the groom has taken away the things that the bride loves that are hurting her. And the bride is heartbroken because she's like, why would you take away these false idols that I loved? Why would you take away these false gods? Like, I loved them, I worshipped them. But in reality, that is because the groom was like, but I love you. Like, I'm the true love. Like, you don't need to worship these other things. And that's how we are in our lives. It is so easy to hold on to these idols of whether that is our pride or, wanting all of these likes because it feels, it feels good, it feels affirming, or even just glorifying like for me, one of the convictions of this week is I was glorifying a position that I wanted over God's work in my life. And so sometimes God redirects us from those things, takes those things away, and it hurts. We're like, Lord, why would you take that away? When in reality, he's like, what I have is so much better.
Yeah, for sure. If you look down, my shirt says Jireh on it.
Yes.
His background, and it says he will provide.
Perfect. It's
he provides
perfect.
everything we need.
Yeah. He really does. He really does. I was following a podcaster one time who she was doing a financial fast. I had never heard of a financial fast. But the point of that was, and this is a very physical material example, but the whole point of that is to emphasize that the Lord does provide not only, just the core desires of our heart aligning with his will, but just everything that we need. He cares about the little things as well.
He does.
He really does. He really does.
Yeah. Like just an example of that, like it's not my story to tell, but
I'm
just going to keep it anonymous. But someone I follow who I know in my circles, she has been having troubles getting pregnant, and she basically she has a daughter. And she was she just posted about it today, so that's why I'm like sharing it. It's fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
But her post was saying God does provide because after 29 months of you can't have any more children. You are not able to have a baby. Negative pregnancy tests, 3 different consultations. She is now having a baby that's due in September of this year.
That's incredible.
That is amazing.
Wow.
Like she was posting about it a lot.
Right.
And it's just like so nice, and so like it just makes me feel so happy to know that God does provide.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just not the right timing.
Right.
Either.
Absolutely, yeah. God does provide. He really does. And we'll be praying for her too until September, because I know that can be scary as well.
It
whenever
can be.
that's I had a friend named Isaac in high school, and his name was Isaac because his parents weren't supposed to be able to have him. So that's such an amazing story. I'm glad you shared that. Yeah.
Oh, well, no problem.
Well, moving on into our last little question is, how are we called to react to those who embrace sin? Not just living in sin, because if there's a brother or sister living in sin, we can hold them accountable, but those who are truly embracing it and choosing to live in it and thriving in things of the world.
Yeah, I think we as Christians, we who are following God's, like the ways of God, we can kind of see people embracing sin.
Yes.
And like our natural inclination is to become angry. And be like, why are you living this way when you could have everything if you just did, like, we want them to understand.
Right.
But that's not how we have to, that's not how we react. We don't react in anger. We don't tell them all these things. And, I can get like that too. I have been guilty of reacting in anger, especially when I get those comments on posts. I'm
my goodness.
If only you knew.
Yeah. Right.
But,
right.
Yeah. And then, they call me prideful, and I have to check myself. But something that, we have to look at is, how would Jesus react to those who are embracing sin?
Right.
And this is laid out all throughout the New Testaments, all throughout the Gospels. So, like, I made some points here. But in Matthew 7, 1-2, he tells us not to judge others. Like Jesus tells us, do not judge others, and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And then I think that's it. And then, because like we can't expect non-Christians to behave like Christians do.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's the main thing. We can't hold them to that expectation, because either they might not have the knowledge of the Bible,
right,
or their hearts are hardened.
Right. They just don't have the Holy Spirit. They don't have the same guide that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like something that I recently learned, because like I haven't been a Christian for very long, so like you talking about Hosea was like awesome, because I haven't read that yet, like at all.
Oh my goodness, you have to read Hosea. It's so good.
It is next on my list.
Yeah.
But like sometimes something that I really struggled to understand was like the story of Moses and Pharaoh.
Oh, yes.
God hardened the heart of Pharaoh so then all these events could take place.
Right.
It did make me sad because
Right.
like that's one less person who would be able to experience God.
Right. Right.
So I'm
That's
like,
a tricky one.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. And I asked my husband about it because he's been a Christian his whole life, and he even had a hard time understanding, like explaining it to me. So when I think about, people's whose hearts are hardened for a bigger purpose, it makes me sad. But
It does, as it should, because our hearts should break for what breaks God's heart. And God's heart breaks whenever his children are separate from him and living in that separation and having a party in that cave of separation. That breaks God's
I
heart.
know,
And
like
that should break
celebrating
ours.
being separate from him.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to touch on the Pharaoh thing because I did a project in school on the Exodus and the plagues in Pharaoh, and what I learned was fascinating. First of all, each of the 10 plagues targeted a different Egyptian god. Isn't that so cool? And
That
so,
is
like,
cool.
the Nile turning to blood, they thought the Nile was a god. They worshipped the Nile. And so it's kind of funny where you see God has a sense of humor of he's killing the false god of the Nile. And then just things like that in every single plague. But one of the perspectives that I heard about God hardening Pharaoh's heart is the people of Egypt thought that Pharaoh was God. They thought he was a incarnation of the sun god Ra, who was like their top dog. And so, the message that I read and heard was that, basically God's saying, well, you think you're God? I am the God. Like, I am the one and only God. He presented himself as the divine God at Sinai right after this. And so it is a tricky subject to wrestle with. And whenever we hear things like that, it should hurt our hearts, and we should want to go pursue those people. Fasting forward to the New Testament, we see Jesus pursuing people who are living in this sin, and that can be really hard too, because Christians were taught, on one hand, associate with good community, surround yourself with good people so you can be poured into. But there's also the balance of we're called to go, and we're called to make disciples. And so there's that unique balance of, okay, well, Jesus had his apostles, like he had his disciples, but also he didn't run away from the people who were living in sin. He invited them over for dinner and went to their house for dinner.
Yeah. He literally sat at their table, and like not only that, but he showed mercy to people that were caught in sin.
Yes, I am so quick to judge. Like, I'm so quick to judge people for their sin, and then it's like I need to look in the mirror.
I know, like I'm the most sinful of them all. Like
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
all sin separates, no matter what it is, and it doesn't matter if it's metaphorically 1 foot of space or like 5 feet of space. That's separation, And so that's another thing to remember is we are just as broken as the people who are celebrating in their sin. The only difference is that we have someone interceding for us on our behalf, and we need to go and introduce them to him,
Amen. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something I like to think about too is like in the New Testament where that woman was caught in idolatry.
Yes.
Yeah. He showed mercy to that woman. He, like, everyone was telling him to, like, I forget what they were telling him, but it wasn't good stuff. And he's like, basically, whoever has not sinned, be the first to cast the first stone, I think.
And he was the only one he was the one who could have done it, and he didn't.
Yeah, he didn't. And then everyone ran.
Yeah.
And he's like, did no one condemn you? And she's like, no. And then he said, neither do I. And then I was like, wow, that's
Tears.
mercy right there. He does that for us every single day.
Oh my goodness. And we don't deserve that. I know I don't deserve that. I always joke with my friends, I'm like, if I did not have Jesus, I would just be a completely terrible person.
I was.
I would love to hear, if you mind to share just quickly a little snippet of your testimony.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, if you don't know who I am or whatever and haven't heard it before, I didn't turn Christian. I became a Christian when I was 21. So up until that point, I was living in sin and apart from God. And my life looked very different from that. And the person I was very different. And when I look back on videos of myself, I can see the difference. My tone of voice is even different. My voice was deeper, which is weird.
Yeah.
And I swore all the time. My favorite word was the F word, for example. I said it in every sentence. I treated people horribly, my mom horribly. I didn't show forgiveness. I held on to resentment a lot more. And so anyways, my husband, or the guy that became my husband, kind of introduced Jesus to me at a Starbucks one day. And yeah, ever since then, like we hung out, but he didn't start dating or pursuing me till I accepted Christ into my heart, because that was a value that he held on to, and that was important to him. So yeah, that's kind of how I became a Christian. But yeah, just the way you change, your heart changes.
Yeah. And what if he had never introduced Christ to you at the Starbucks? What if he had never sat down with you and had that conversation?
I would probably not have pursued it on my own.
Yeah.
He planted the seed, and then God did the rest.
Which is incredible. And that's what we're called to do. We're called to be the salt and the light, and to go and help people grow and point them to Jesus. That's incredible. That's such a cool story.
Thanks.
That's crazy for me to think, because I'm 21 now. And so it's crazy to imagine life without Christ. You know, I became a Christian whenever I was really young. My followers know my testimony, but I grew up with both of my parents in ministry, so I just always knew about Christ. I legitimately thought that like everyone in the world was a Christian until I was like a solid 8 years old. And then I went to a public school, which nothing wrong with that, but I realized, oh, curse words exist. There's people who don't love Jesus. Great.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just never had developed a relationship with Christ until I was in early high school. And just the way that the Holy Spirit completely convicted my heart, and then it was whenever I started truly following Christ, the way that I saw the world completely changed. Like everything was suddenly either a blessing or a redirection from Christ. And, you know, everything was just of his love and protection. And so that's what we're supposed to go and show people who are embracing sin, living in sin. We're not supposed to look at them and think, oh, I want to be over there. We're supposed to look at them and think, oh, I want them to be over here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like just touching on like the salt and the light, something I was doing some research.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like back in the Middle East, salt had two major purposes basically, and one was for you probably know this, but
I'm getting excited. Go.
Salt was used to preserve things, because back in the desert they didn't have refrigerators or anything, so salt was used to preserve meat and everything. And then the other one we know, which is to enhance flavor. So what does this mean? Like, what does this imagery mean, or analogy, I guess you could say, mean for us as Christians? Well, upon reading, I'm gonna pull up my notes.
Yes,
here.
do it.
So yeah, the verse is Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. So, you know, when it's used as a preservative, he's telling us that we are meant to be preservatives in the world, slowing down the advancement of like evil, basically. Spiritual decay.
Yes.
And then like for the flavor enhancer part, we're meant to just enhance the lives of others around us, showing them the goodness and the love of God. And like just making his work stand out from their normal, like the normal way of doing things.
Yeah, people are supposed to look at us and be like, she's different, he's different. Why are they brighter? Why are they more joyful? Why are they more peaceful? Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, were you about to say something else?
Oh, just what you said there, how they're brighter and everything, how they have like this light to them. That's what made my husband stand out to me. Wow. He stood apart from any other man that I'd been with. Wow. So that's kind of what like drew me into him. I was like, I want what he has. And then that kind of opened up that conversation about Jesus. That's
so cool. Oh, that's amazing. And thinking about salt more, that's evidence of, is the, how do I say this? Whoa, what are words? That is a great explanation for how salt is used in Leviticus. And so, of course, we know when Jesus was talking about be salt and light, he was preaching the Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, he was preaching to Jewish people who had studied the Torah and had studied the law. And so whenever I'm reading the New Testament, I love the New Testament. I try to put myself in that mindset of, okay, what would they have been thinking at this time? And if they knew the law really well, in Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13, it says, "You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing from your grain offerings. With all your offerings you shall offer salt." And so I think it's interesting because here, salt is representative of the covenant that God made with his people. Oh. And so whenever God's saying, be salt and light, that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying, live as children of the covenant, that I am your God and you are my people. And so we should be brighter and we should enhance the world in that way. So I love talking about salt in the Bible. I think it's so fascinating. All the cool ties.
Definitely is. Wow, I didn't know that. I don't think I've read Leviticus either, so.
It's a hard one to get through, I'll be honest. It's one of those books where, like, you just have to get through it.
Not push through.
Yes, keep the context in mind. What helped me get through it is knowing that the main theme of Leviticus, the main theme of the law, is everything in Leviticus emphasizes life over death. And so whenever you put those glasses on, it's really easy to see that. And it's really cool because that's what, like Jesus came as the fulfillment of the law, not to abolish the law, to fulfill the law. And Jesus came to give us life, and everything in the law emphasizes life. So that was what got me through Leviticus, because I got to the weird skin diseases, and I was like, I was like, I don't know about this one, boss. But yeah. Well, before we wrap up, do you have anything else that you want to add to this conversation?
I think that's it. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Awesome.
I think just, if you find yourself being caught up in envy of the wicked, just remember the promises that God has promised you in the Bible, and that the ways of the world, even if you had everything that they have on this earth, is not going to fill your heart. Only Christ fills your heart. Right. So just pursue Christ above all things, and you will be happy.
Absolutely. And tagging off of that, everything of the world has an expiration date. The only thing that's eternal is the love of Christ and his God. And so when we delight ourselves in anything else, that thing is going to die. That thing is not going to last. And so that's a good thing to remember too whenever we are having a hard time struggling with desiring the ways of the world, is the ways of the world are going to die and they lead to death. And and we've been given life.
We don't take them with us.
No, absolutely. We have been given the greatest inheritance of the greatest treasures in heaven. So why would we want to keep all of these dark things that seem like they're going to give us temporary joy?
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Susannah. Thank you for joining me. This has just been the best.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. You guys be sure you go follow Susannah. She is so incredible, so encouraging, and I promise she will brighten your day every time she pops up on your phone. So definitely go and check out her stuff and her podcast. Her podcast is wonderful too. And yes, we will see you all next week. Bye.